June 27th, 2026, 11:47 p.m. 8 Russian Shadow Fleet tankers are moving through the darkness of the Black Sea, running without proper transponder signals, flagged under shell companies registered in the United Arab Emirates and Gabon. Their captains believe they are invisible. They believe the night protects them. They believe Russia's electronic warfare umbrella has blinded every Ukrainian sensor pointed at the water. They are wrong on every count. Before the first Magura V5 naval drone breaks the surface and begins its terminal run toward a vessel of 11,000 tons displacement, let me tell you what this operation actually was. Not a lucky strike, not an improvised ambush. This was the result of 72 hours of coordinated action, months of intelligence preparation, and a targeting package assembled by Ukrainian SBU operatives embedded in port contacts across 3 countries. Ukraine rewrote the rules of naval warfare without a single surface warship. I'm your host at Steel Horizon, where we analyze the battles that change wars. What you're about to watch is not just a strike story. It is the story of how Ukraine mapped an entire Shadow Fleet logistics network, vessel by vessel, route by route, refueling stop by refueling stop, and then dismantled it in under 3 days. When it was over, 8 tankers were burning or adrift. Russia's Crimean fuel reserve timeline had collapsed by an estimated 6 weeks, and the commanders in Sevastopol who had guaranteed Moscow the Shadow Fleet was untouchable were scrambling to explain what had just happened. Stay with us, because what unfolds in the next 26 minutes reveals the full operational architecture of the most sophisticated naval drone campaign in modern warfare. To understand the scale of what Ukraine accomplished, you first need to understand what the Shadow Fleet actually was, and why Russia thought it was safe. After Western sanctions tightened through 2024 and into 2025, Russia faced a critical logistics problem in Crimea. The peninsula's fuel reserves, ammunition stocks, and material resupply all depended on sea routes through the Black Sea. With formal naval traffic increasingly monitored and interdicted, Moscow turned to what analysts call the Shadow Fleet, a loose network of aging tankers and cargo vessels operating under falsified documentation, obscured ownership structures, and rotating flag registrations designed to evade international tracking. These ships were not Russian flagged. Many were registered through intermediary companies in jurisdictions with minimal maritime oversight. Their automatic identification system transponders were either spoofed, broadcasting false positions, or switched off entirely during sensitive transit legs. Russian naval commanders considered them effectively invisible to Ukrainian intelligence. The logic was simple: no flag, no name, no paper trail. An anonymous vessel in anonymous water. What those commanders did not account for was what Ukraine had been doing for the previous 8 months. Which weapon was deadlier in this operation? A. The Magura V5 naval drones. B. Long-range artillery preparation. C. Electronic warfare suppression? Drop your answer in the comments. We'll break down the full analysis by the end. The targeting package for Operation Franko, the internal Ukrainian military designation for this campaign, confirmed in post-operation briefings leaked to Ukrainian intelligence analysts, began not with satellite imagery, but with human intelligence. SBU operatives had spent months cultivating sources inside port infrastructure across 3 Black Sea-adjacent countries: dock workers, fuel transfer crews, customs intermediaries who processed falsified documentation. Layer by layer, Ukrainian intelligence built a picture that no satellite alone could have assembled. Satellite imagery confirmed vessel positions and transit corridors. But the critical intelligence, which vessels were actually part of the Shadow Fleet network, which routes they used during the vulnerable window approaching the Kerch Strait, and which refueling stops they used along the Bulgarian and Turkish coastlines before entering Russian-controlled waters, that came from people on the ground. I spent considerable time going through the publicly available fragments of this intelligence picture, and one detail kept coming up in every source. The precision of the targeting wasn't just about finding the ships. It was about finding them at the exact moment they were most vulnerable, when they had just taken on full fuel loads and were transiting the final approach corridor before the Kerch Strait. A fully loaded tanker burns differently than an empty one. A fully loaded tanker, struck in the right compartment, does not just sink. It becomes a fuel-fed fire that can burn for days. By the 3rd week of June 2026, Ukrainian naval intelligence had assembled a complete operational picture. 8 vessels, confirmed routes, confirmed transit windows. And critically, confirmation that the Russian electronic warfare systems providing coverage along those approach corridors had been degraded by a series of Ukrainian EW suppression operations conducted throughout May and early June. Those operations targeted Russian radar installations and electronic warfare nodes along the Crimean coastline. Satellite imagery confirmed structural damage to at least 3 installations. The degradation was not complete, but it was enough. Ukraine didn't need to be invisible. It just needed to be invisible long enough. Stay with me, because what happens in the next 18 minutes of this story destroys an entire Shadow Fleet logistics network, and the moment it begins is not when the drones hit the water. It's what happened 48 hours before the first strike, June 25th, 2026, 3:17 a.m. An encrypted signal reaches the Magura V5 operational control center embedded in a coastal position whose location remains classified. The signal is not a launch order. It is an abort. 12 hours before the original planned launch window, Ukrainian naval commanders received intelligence that one of the 8 targeted vessels had deviated from its projected route. The Meridian Star, a tanker registered to a Gabonese shell company and positively identified by SBU analysts as part of the Shadow Network, had altered course by approximately 40 kilometers to the southwest. The reason was unclear. A mechanical problem, a schedule change, a captain's decision. The problem was tactical. The Magura V5 naval drones operate at ranges up to 200 kilometers from their launch points, but the original attack plan had been calculated to intercept all 8 vessels within a specific geographic kill zone over a 4-hour window. If the Meridian Star's new route held, it would pass through that zone 6 hours after the other 7 vessels. Hitting the first 7 on schedule meant Meridian Star would have 6 hours of warning. Its crew would see the attack on the others, alter course, and potentially escape. Ukraine had one option: wait. Delay the entire operation by 24 hours and allow all 8 vessels to converge again within range. That decision meant 24 hours of exposure for the Magura teams at their coastal positions. 24 more hours for Russian intelligence to detect any signal, any movement, any anomaly. And a launch window 24 hours closer to dawn. Ukrainian commanders made the call in under 4 minutes. They waited. June 26th, 2026, 11:31 p.m. All 8 vessels confirmed within the operational corridor. The launch order transmitted. The Magura V5 is not a large weapon. At approximately 5 meters in length and carrying a payload of up to 320 kilograms of explosives, it resembles, from a distance, a jet ski that has lost its rider. It rides low in the water, hull barely breaking the surface, and moves at speeds up to 42 knots. Its navigation system combines GPS with inertial guidance and an optical targeting system for terminal approach. It is, in every meaningful sense, a precision-guided weapon that happens to float rather than fly. What makes the Magura particularly lethal against the Shadow Fleet is what it does not have. No radar signature worth tracking. Minimal acoustic noise at low speed approach. Against the degraded Russian electronic warfare coverage along the Kerch corridor, a Magura running its terminal approach at night, at surface level, against the hull of a vessel whose crew does not expect an attack. That Magura is effectively invisible until impact. Ukrainian drone operators launched in successive waves, not simultaneously, deliberately sequenced. The first wave targeted the 3 vessels moving at the lead of the convoy, spaced approximately 4 kilometers apart. 3 Magura units, 1 per vessel, launched from concealed coastal positions and guided through the darkness toward pre-registered intercept coordinates. The first impact registered at 11:58 p.m. Vessel identification confirmed as the Lazarus Bay, a tanker of Gabonese registry, 8,400 displacement tons, carrying an estimated fuel load of approximately 6,000 metric tons of diesel and heating oil destined for Crimean depots. The Magura struck the Lazarus Bay at the waterline, port side, approximately 30 meters forward of the engine compartment. The explosive payload detonated on contact. Structural analysis of publicly available strike footage, confirmed by Ukrainian General Staff reports released 48 hours after the operation, indicated that the initial detonation breached the hull into the main fuel tank. The fuel ignited 31 seconds after the initial detonation. By midnight, The Lazarus Bay was visible on thermal satellite imagery as a burning point source 15 kilometers from the Kerch Strait approaches. 11 seconds from impact to fire. 11 seconds. The second Magura struck its target, identified in post-operation briefings as the Caspian Voyager, a tanker of Tanzanian registry. At 12:03 a.m. on June 27th, the Caspian Voyager's crew had not yet received any distress signal from the Lazarus Bay. The Russian maritime communication protocols along that corridor were running on degraded encryption systems, a secondary effect of the May EW suppression campaign, and the distress call from the Lazarus Bay's crew was delayed, fragmented, and partially unintelligible. The Caspian Voyager had no warning. How many vessels did Ukraine successfully strike or disable in this operation? A. 5 vessels. B. 8 vessels. C. 6 vessels. The answer comes at the end. Stay through. The third strike, targeting a vessel identified as the Volga Fortune, came at 12:07 a.m. By this point, the Russian Naval Coordination Center in Sevastopol had received fragmented reports of an incident near the Kerch approaches. The word incident was used because nobody in the command chain had yet concluded they were under a coordinated attack. The working assumption, for approximately 9 critical minutes, was that the Lazarus Bay had suffered a mechanical accident, a fuel system failure, perhaps a boiler explosion. That assumption cost Russia everything. What strikes us about this 9-minute window, and we've looked at this from multiple analytical angles, is that it reflects something deeply systemic about how Russia manages battlefield information. The command hierarchy is structured for reporting upward, not for lateral coordination. The Maritime Coordination Center in Sevastopol received information from the Lazarus Bay incident, but did not immediately push a warning to the other 7 vessels in the corridor. No commander below a certain rank felt authorized to issue a fleet-wide alert without confirmation from above. By the time confirmation arrived, Wave 2 was already in the water, 12:19 a.m. The second wave launched. 5 Magura units. Targets: the 4 remaining vessels in the main convoy body, plus the Meridian Star, which had rejoined its original route and was now converging on the kill zone from the southwest, running approximately 30 kilometers behind the main group. The targeting solution for the Meridian Star was the most technically demanding of the operation. Its altered course meant it was approaching from a different bearing than the other vessels, placing it at the edge of the Magura operational envelope from the original launch position. Ukrainian operators solved this by using a second concealed launch site further southwest along the coastline, from which a dedicated 2-drone element had been pre-positioned specifically for the Meridian Star intercept. The planning for that contingency had been built into the targeting package 2 weeks before launch. Ukrainian drone operators call this shadow targeting, building backup intercept solutions for every primary target before the operation begins, on the assumption that something will change and the primary solution will fail. Shadow targeting kept the Meridian Star in the kill window, even after its route deviation threatened to remove it from the operation entirely. Put yourself in the position of a Ukrainian Magura operator on the night of June 26th. You have been at a concealed coastal position for 48 hours longer than originally planned. You are operating under strict emissions control. No unnecessary radio transmissions, minimal electronic signatures. You have launched your drone into darkness toward a target you cannot see with your own eyes, guided by coordinates from a targeting package assembled by analysts you have never met, against a vessel whose crew is about to experience the worst night of their lives. And you know that if the degraded Russian EW coverage has recovered even partially, your drone may be detected and intercepted before it reaches the target. You run the terminal approach anyway, because the target package is solid, because the SBU spent 8 months building it, because Ukraine does not improvise this kind of operation. The second wave strikes began at 12:29 a.m. and continued through 12:51 a.m. 4 vessels in the main convoy body hit within a 22-minute window. All 4 confirmed struck. 3 confirmed with hull breaches and subsequent fires. 1. A smaller vessel identified as the Bosphorus Link, approximately 4,200 displacement tons. Struck but not immediately on fire, with structural damage assessed as disabling. The Bosphorus Link lost propulsion and was dead in the water by 1:04 a.m. The Meridian Star, the vessel that had nearly escaped the operation through its route deviation, was struck at 1:17 a.m. Both Magura units from the southwest element successfully completed terminal approach. The first struck at the stern. The second, 23 seconds later, struck amidships. Post-operation satellite imagery confirmed the Meridian star burning on the water at 1:45 a.m. It was still visible on thermal imaging at dawn. Here's an unpopular take, and we'll say it plainly knowing some viewers will disagree. Russia's shadow fleet strategy was a strategic miscalculation rooted in contempt. The assumption that falsified flags and switched-off transponders could substitute for actual security measures, actual naval escort, actual electronic protection. That assumption reflects an intelligence culture that had stopped taking Ukrainian capabilities seriously. That contempt cost Russia 8 vessels, an estimated 6 weeks of Crimean fuel reserve timeline, and whatever credibility remained in the shadow fleet concept as a logistics solution. Ukraine did not win this engagement because it got lucky. Ukraine won because it outthought a system that had stopped thinking. By 2:30 a.m. on June 27, 2026, Russian maritime coordination in Sevastopol had achieved full situational awareness of what had happened. And the intercepted communications leaked to Ukrainian intelligence analysts in the days that followed paint a picture of organizational paralysis that is, frankly, remarkable. The first intercepted transmission, time-stamped 1:22 a.m., was a request from a maritime coordination officer asking for confirmation that the attacks came from Ukrainian drones, not from a submarine, not from a surface vessel, not from an aircraft. The question itself reveals the confusion. Russian commanders knew Ukraine was capable of naval drone operations. They had seen it before. But 8 vessels in a single night, in a corridor they believed was covered, seemed impossible. It was not impossible. Ukraine had simply spent 8 months making the impossible routine. Subscribe to Steel Horizon if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what we're about to break down in the aftermath of this operation changes how every navy in the world is thinking about surface drone threats right now. The second intercepted transmission, time-stamped 2:14 a.m., was a logistics commander attempting to assess whether alternative supply routes could compensate for the loss of the 8 Shadow Fleet vessels. The assessment was grim. The Shadow Fleet had been carrying approximately 40% of Crimea's fuel resupply capacity for that supply cycle. Losing 8 vessels simultaneously meant the fuel reserves at Crimean depots, military fuel, aviation fuel, and general logistics fuel, were now operating on a timeline approximately 6 weeks shorter than planned. For a military conducting active operations from Crimean bases, that was not an abstract problem. The third intercepted transmission, shared publicly by Ukrainian intelligence services on July 1, 2026, with audio fragments, was a conversation between a senior logistics officer and a subordinate. The officer said, in translation, "We built the Shadow Fleet so they couldn't see us. They saw everything." That single sentence encapsulates everything that has changed in the Black Sea since 2022. Russia built a logistics architecture on the assumption of invisibility. Ukraine built an intelligence architecture on the assumption that nothing stays invisible forever. The only question was whether Ukraine could map it fast enough and strike before Russia could adapt. They could, and they did. Here is the part that most analyses of this operation understate. The Magura V5 units used in Operation Franko were not the original Ukrainian design. According to sourcing from Ukrainian defense procurement officials speaking to European security analysts in July 2026, a significant portion of the Magura drones deployed in this operation were manufactured under a defense agreement finalized in late 2025, under which components and production capacity were provided through a U.S.-Ukraine cooperative arrangement. The agreement, sometimes described informally as the Magura Partnership, allowed Ukrainian manufacturers to scale production dramatically while incorporating U.S.-sourced guidance components that improved terminal accuracy in electronically contested environments. This matters tactically because the degraded Russian EW coverage along the Kerch corridor, while significant, was not zero. Ukrainian operators were working in an environment where some Russian electronic interference remained active. The upgraded guidance systems meant that the Magura units could complete their terminal approach sequences even in the presence of partial jamming, a capability that older drone configurations did not reliably have. The most surprising part of this entire operation is not the drones. It's not the targeting intelligence. It's not even the timing. What's most surprising is that Russia had adequate warning this capability existed and still did not adequately protect the Shadow Fleet. Ukrainian naval drones had already struck Russian Black Sea Fleet vessels in Sevastopol Harbor in late 2022 and 2023. The capability was not secret. The Shadow Fleet vulnerability had been discussed in open-source security analysis since mid-2024. Russia chose to believe that falsified flags, route obfuscation, and degraded Ukrainian EW vulnerability would be sufficient. That choice reflected a decision-making culture that processes information through the lens of what it wants to be true rather than what the evidence shows. Will Russia be able to rebuild a functional Shadow Fleet logistics network before the end of 2026? Comment why yes or no, and tell us what you think they'd have to change to make it work. The aftermath played out across multiple strategic dimensions simultaneously. On the tactical level, the immediate effect was felt in Crimean fuel distribution within 72 hours. Ukrainian intelligence sources, confirmed by satellite imagery showing changes in vehicle traffic patterns at Crimean fuel depot facilities, indicated significant reductions in fuel distribution activity consistent with conservation measures. Russian military aviation operating from Crimean bases, primarily conducting strike operations against Ukrainian southern cities, showed a measurable reduction in sortie rates beginning approximately 5 days after the operation. Ukrainian Air Force analysts attributed this, in part, to fuel conservation protocols implemented as a direct consequence of the Shadow Fleet losses. On the strategic level, the operation had an effect extending far beyond Crimea. The Shadow Fleet concept, the idea that Russia could maintain logistics flows through opacity and deception, had been the backbone of sanctions evasion efforts for nearly 3 years. The loss of 8 vessels in a single night, in a corridor Russian commanders had considered safe, sent a signal that reached beyond Russian naval planners. The insurers, shell company intermediaries, and port facilitators who made the Shadow Fleet function operate on risk calculations. When the risk calculation changes, when vessels in supposedly safe corridors start burning, the network loses more than ships. It loses the confidence of the participants who make it possible. By July 10, 2026, European maritime security analysts had documented significant changes in Shadow Fleet vessel behavior throughout the Black Sea. Several identified Shadow Fleet vessels had ceased transit operations entirely. Others had shifted to more southern routes, adding transit time and cost. The operational flexibility of the Shadow Fleet network, its ability to respond quickly to Russian logistical needs, had been severely degraded. Ukraine did not sink a logistics system with 8 drones. It changed the risk calculus of everyone who operated within it. One detail that has stayed with me through every read of this operation: the targeting package for Operation Franko included not just the 8 primary targets. It included backup targeting solutions for 6 additional vessels identified as Shadow Fleet associated that were not within the Magura operational envelope on the night of June 26th. Ukraine didn't build a targeting package for 8 ships. It built a targeting package for 14. The operation struck 8. The other 6 now know they are on a list. That is not a logistics strike. That is a message. If you believe tactics win wars, and this operation is perhaps the clearest demonstration of that principle, type Steel Horizon in the comments. The battle damage assessment, consolidated from Ukrainian General Staff reports, satellite imagery analysis, and open-source verification conducted by European and American OSINT analysts in the days after the strike, confirmed the following: 8 vessels struck, 7 confirmed with significant structural damage and fire, 1 confirmed disabled but not on fire, 0 confirmed sunk at time of assessment, with 2 vessels whose ultimate fate, whether salvaged, sunk during towing, or written off, remaining unconfirmed as of the date of this analysis. The aggregate value of the vessels themselves, based on insurance valuations from available Shadow Fleet documentation, cross-referenced with vessel registries, was estimated at between $140 million and $180 million US dollars. The value of the cargo lost was not calculable with certainty, but was estimated at several tens of millions of additional dollars. Ukrainian drone operator losses, 0. The Magura units are expendable by design. No operators were in danger. No Ukrainian forces were exposed to direct risk during the strike phase. 0 Ukrainian casualties. $140 to $180 million in Russian maritime assets destroyed or disabled. 6 weeks removed from Crimean fuel reserve timelines. a Shadow Fleet logistics network shaken to its operational foundations. The operation did not end with the last strike. What came after was, in some ways, more significant than the strikes themselves. In the 48 hours following the operation, Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, conducted a strategic information operation around the strike footage and intercepted communications. Selected drone operator footage, showing terminal approach and impact sequences from at least 3 of the 8 strikes, was released through coordinated channels on July 1, 2026. The footage was verified by multiple OSINT analysts within hours. The intercepted communications audio fragments followed on July 3rd. The information operation was not incidental. It was planned as part of the operation itself. Ukraine understood that the physical effect of destroying 8 tankers was meaningful but finite. The informational effect, demonstrating to every participant in the Shadow Fleet network that Ukraine had complete targeting intelligence, had watched their vessels for months, and could strike at night without warning, was more durable. Russia denied the strikes for approximately 11 hours after the footage became public. Then the denial became a series of contradictory statements about the nature of the damage, the identities of the vessels, and the circumstances of the attacks. By July 5th, the Russian Ministry of Defense had stopped commenting on the operation entirely. The silence was its own kind of confirmation. What would NATO planners have done differently with this targeting package? Deployed submarine assets, air-launched weapons, or stayed with drone operations? Comment your analysis below. There is a broader lesson embedded in Operation Franko that every serious student of modern warfare should internalize. The most powerful weapon Ukraine deployed in the Black Sea theater is not the Magura V5 drone. The drone is the delivery mechanism. The weapon is the intelligence architecture. The months of human intelligence cultivation, satellite correlation, OSINT cross-referencing, and SBU operational work that built the targeting package. The Magura can only strike what Ukraine can find. Ukraine found everything. Real tactics, real consequences. Steel horizon. This pattern, where the physical weapon is preceded by an intelligence preparation phase that is longer, more labor-intensive, and more decisive than the strike itself, has been Ukraine's consistent operational signature across multiple domains throughout this war. It was visible in the HIMARS campaign against Russian logistics nodes in 2022, where the strike accuracy that stunned military analysts globally was built on months of targeting intelligence from U.S.-provided satellite data and Ukrainian ground observation. It was visible in the Storm Shadow strikes against Russian command posts in Crimea in 2023, where post-strike analysis showed targeting data assembled from multiple intelligence disciplines over extended periods. It is visible here in Operation Franko, where the 72 hours of drone operations were the visible tip of an 8-month intelligence spear. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to find targets, and that is the more durable military innovation. The answer to the question we posed earlier: B-8 vessels. Ukraine struck all 8 targeted vessels within the operational window, confirming the targeting package's accuracy across the full scope of the operation. A 100% success rate, all 8 primary targets struck, is extraordinarily rare in precision strike operations of this complexity. It reflects both the quality of the targeting intelligence and the operational discipline of the Magura crews who maintained concealment for an extra 24 hours rather than compromise the mission. Now, the questions that stay with us after every serious analysis of Operation Franko: was the decision to delay the operation 24 hours, exposing the Magura teams to additional detection risk, the right tactical call? Ukraine's commanders clearly believed the complete targeting package was worth the additional exposure. Given the results, they were correct. But the margin for error in those 24 hours was real. Could Russia have protected the Shadow Fleet with different defensive measures? The answer, based on what we know about the degradation of their EW coverage and the thoroughness of Ukraine's intelligence preparation, is probably not. Not against an adversary willing to spend 8 months building a targeting package. The Shadow Fleet concept assumed opacity could substitute for security. Against a persistent intelligence effort, opacity has limits. And the question we leave you with: as autonomous surface drones become cheaper, more capable, and more widely proliferated, what does this operation tell us about the future vulnerability of maritime logistics for every navy in the world? Subscribe to Steel Horizon. Because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Black Sea surface is quiet now, above the resting places of 8 Shadow Fleet tankers. The water moves over their outlines without ceremony. The fuel they carried has dispersed. The crews who survived were recovered. The commanders who guaranteed Moscow that the Shadow Fleet was safe are answering questions they do not want to answer. Modern warfare does not forgive the assumption of invisibility. It hunts it. Stay vigilant.